Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition, and for those of you that receive an email, just a few minutes ago we sent that out, and we talked about the issues that are in front and center. As a matter of fact, the subject line says it didn't take long, and I point out that 2 days after the opinion was announced by the Supreme Court, Time magazine ran an article by Mark Oppenheimer titled, "Now's the Time to End Tax Exemption for Religious Institutions." The ink on the article was barely dry before the ACLU announced it was no longer going to support the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Only days later, Barry Lynn announced that his organization, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, is launching an initiative to force Christian universities to provide same-sex married housing on campus. And less than 2 weeks after the court's opinion was announced, Progressive began calling for the impeachment of Toledo Municipal Judge Alan McConnell after he respectfully declined to marry a same-sex couple. I can go on, but the point I'm making is we've got a lot to talk about. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford.
We have a lot to talk about. We also have a lot to do to protect the rights of people to live according to their faith. To me, it's amazing, and I think your description was perfect, that this happened so fast. It just didn't take that long. We didn't expect, well, in a sense, we did expect a lot of these attacks, but they did come very quickly. Yeah,
Kelly, I was going to ask where I went wrong, but I guess Penn agrees. Maybe you agree with that as well. I saw you on Fox News Sunday, so I guess you've been saying some of the same things.
Yeah, if you agree with my opponent on that, then you've got some serious problems with the facts of what's really going on out there. But it's and I do think this is somewhat the strategy. Those who saw that debate on Fox News Sunday with myself and Evan Wolfson, I mean the approach on the other side is to say, oh, nothing's happening. There's no effect on religious liberty. I'm for religious liberty until you get very specific. And then it's like, oh, yeah, the baker should be fined into bankruptcy, and they should be punished for expressing a different view on marriage. But that's not a religious freedom issue because that's in commerce.
Yeah, it's public accommodation.
That's right. We only believe in religious freedom in your church. What is incredible about hearing that from your opponent on a debate is that's exactly what Justice Alito said. He said, if we're not careful, what we're going to have is, do you have a right to disagree on same-sex marriage? Sure, as long as it's in a whisper from the recesses of your home. And that's where they're trying to take us.
Penna, your thoughts about this, because we are talking about Aaron and Melissa Klein, in particular, Oregon, and then we're also talking about a judge in Toledo, Ohio, and in both cases we are seeing that they have some reservations, and in one case people are trying to drive the Kleins into complete bankruptcy, and in another case they're calling for an impeachment of a judge.
Well, the difference there is one has to do with a business, which we can talk about, and certainly the Kleins have been in the news for quite a while with regard to their bakery. The other one is a public city or county approving a marriage or facilitating a marriage. And so we have those two that that are under attack. And as you said, perhaps churches are safe right now, but we wonder how long. But each one has to fight its own battle, it seems like, because really, when you look at a business, you've had all start a business, you cannot operate according to your faith. And if we allow that to stand, I think we're in trouble as a country as far as our religious liberty and our individual rights.
Yeah, this is their argument. Now, it's not a true argument. I mean, let's think about if this were true. If you engage in commerce, then the Constitution doesn't really apply. So let's say in some community they decided to make laws that discriminated in commerce on the basis of race. Do you think that people would claim that violates the Constitution? I think so. But somehow you can't claim that when the government makes laws that attack people like Aaron and Melissa Klein based upon their religious beliefs, oh, this is commerce, it doesn't apply. I'm like, so what? So what if it is commerce? You don't lose your constitutional rights because you engage in commerce. I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing. And they would never apply this to their issues, to issues they care about. It's just they feel convenient. It's a nice, convenient argument to try to say, well, we just don't want to protect your religious freedom.
The question I've got right now is, let's just take the bakers for an example. We've got Aaron and Melissa Klein, and they're in trouble because they did not bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. Then you have the bakery in Virginia right now that yesterday did bake a cookie cake that had the Confederate flag on it, and now they're being criticized. If I'm a baker, I'm going, okay, if I do, then I'm going to be accused of something by somebody. If I don't, then the full weight of the government is going to come down upon me. I feel really sorry for these individuals right now.
You really don't know. And the thing is, and this was in an article that you sent me today from Maggie Gallagher, that this is the regulatory state. This isn't the justice system, the courts. The state and federal courts have not weighed in on the Klein's case in Oregon. It's been a regulatory commission of the state that has fined them. And these things were put in place to battle Jim Crow laws. And in a sense, now they're being used for something different. And the issue is that nothing like what happened to Black Americans is happening to people who oppose gay marriage right now. You've got almost all the corporations are just pulling out all the stops to accommodate homosexuals and their agenda. So the people, anybody that wants a cake baked or to stay in a hotel or to rent a home or whatever they want to do can do so. If they want to get married at a county and there's a clerk who's a Christian and doesn't want to officiate or facilitate that marriage, there's always another one that will do it. So it's not that they cannot operate in the culture in the society, especially after the ruling at the Supreme Court. It's just that they want to pull everyone under their orbit to celebrate their lifestyle. They don't want any disagreement, and they're it's just amazingly, it's really being used as a hammer against Christians. And I think if we don't stand up to it right now, then we'll never be able to stand up to it.
Yeah, what I always find interesting about this is, tolerance, diversity, bullying. I mean, all the things that, were originally used by the LGBT, they're violating every one of them. They're showing themselves to be complete hypocrites. Now, there are some, I think of Andrew Sullivan and some others who have spoken up and said that this is totally wrong, but very few. And so I think it's just fascinating to watch the hypocrisy, because many of us do believe in tolerance if it's used correctly. It doesn't mean that everything's right, but it means you tolerate people you disagree with. You show respect to people even if you think they're wrong. But certainly this is using the force of law to try to discriminate against people who believe different. That don't believe the majority, you can't believe what they say, but they did say it. They said this shouldn't be used to attack religious freedom and free speech under the First Amendment, and yet that's exactly what's happening across the country.
Again, the email I sent out, it didn't take long, and it certainly didn't. So we'll talk about Aaron and Melissa Klein. A big debate as to whether or not there's a gag order or not. It depends on whether you read Slate or whether you read Daily Signal or whether you listen to Evan Wolfson or whether you listen to Kelly Shackelford. So we'll sort that out, and then we'll come back to that judge in Toledo, Ohio. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a suggestion. Read Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and then compare it to the government we have today. The framers set forth what is the legitimate role of the federal government.
you will find that it does give the government power to collect taxes and duties. It is required to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. It can coin money, establish post offices and roads. That's about it. Professor Walter Williams, in his new book, American Contempt for Liberty, reminds us that nowhere in the Constitution do we find authority for Congress to tax and spend up to 3/4 of what Congress taxes and spends for today. In other words, there's no constitutional authority for farm subsidies, bank bailouts, food stamps, Social Security, Medicare, and thousands of other federal spending programs. The point he is trying to make is the current government is a significant departure from the original principles of limited government and individual freedom, and we are paying heavily for this expanded government. He estimates that at the turn of the century, expenditures for all levels of government were about $1.7 billion. The average taxpayer paid only $60 a year in taxes. Today, federal expenditures alone are nearly $4 trillion, and the average taxpayer pays more than $10,000 a year for federal, state, and local taxes. You can look at it another way. From the beginning of this country until 1920, federal expenditures were only 3% of GNP. Today, federal expenditures are nearly 25% of GDP. As bad as this trend is, we need to remind ourselves that government is spending more than it receives in taxes. Each day, America is going deeper in debt. We have exceeded $18 trillion in debt and show no signs of balancing a budget anytime in the future. It's worth remembering these facts when evaluating candidates for federal office. I'm not interested in a politician that wants to keep driving down this road. It's time to stop and turn around. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Want to focus a little bit of time, first of all, on the couple in Oregon, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, by Monday, they are supposed to hand over $135,000, although we're told maybe they could get a stay on that or whatever, but that's certainly one issue. And then there has been a real ongoing debate as to whether or not the state of Oregon has actually slapped a gag order on them. For those of you that are not familiar with the debate that Kelly Shackelford did with Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry, we are putting the link on here so you can watch it. It was on Fox News Sunday, but most of us were in church. I was too, but I watched it later. And you had a little bit of a back and forth on this, Kelly, about whether or not the state of Oregon said, number one, you have to pay this fine to these lesbians. Number two, you can't talk about this. I've noticed that Aaron Klein's doing radio, and we're going to try to get him on this program as well to talk about this. So what's about this?
Yeah, well, first, I've met the Kleins. They're wonderful people, them and their children. I think most people remember the Sergeant Monk case where we represented Philip Monk. And at his retirement ceremony, the Kleins, who had already been through the beginnings of what they're going through now, they and Sergeant Monk kind of met and really hit it off because they're both being essentially persecuted for standing for biblical, the biblical definition of marriage. And they said, we want to do your cake for your retirement ceremony. And so I got to meet them, and they're a lot of fun and good folks, and just trying to be obedient. And yes, they were. I mean, number one, they were bankrupted. So Sweet Cakes is no longer. Number two, they've now been fined $135,000 on top of that. I think most people know what happened right after that. They did a GoFundMe, and it was like people were giving money left and right, and it was, I think, at about $112,000 when GoFundMe took it off because they discriminated against them. The hypocrisy is just incredible.
And then Samaritan Purse jumped in, I might mention, because people have been asking me about that, too.
That's right. Yeah. And Samaritan's Purse jumped in. So they've got people supporting them. But then when this decision came down, was it a week ago today or a week ago yesterday, I guess it was, when the decision came down from the commissar, I'll say, it's not a court, it's like a commissioner, he not only ruled that they had to pay the $135,000 for mental anguish because the lesbian couple who wanted the cake and had to go 3 doors down to get it were really traumatized by the fact that the Kleins wouldn't do their cake.
Yeah, one of the things they put in their argument for that was weight gain. One of the issues that happened to them because of this was weight gain.
and
sleeplessness.
And then you're reading this and you're going, this is just, completely insane. And then you get to the kicker, which is at the very end, a cease and desist order is given to Aaron and Melissa Klein, telling them, and I read this very carefully because I thought, this might come up when I'm on Fox, and it did.
Yes, it did.
And I looked at it, and there's like 1,000 words in the cease and desist. It's you can't do, and here's a long list of 100 things, and then there's an or, and there's an and so as an attorney, you kind of got to read it carefully. But if you read it carefully, what it says is they are to cease and desist from communicating or publishing any of their communications that engage in sexual orientation discrimination. Now, what that means is they can't say that they think marriage is a man and a woman because that would violate it, and now they would be held in contempt of court and all this. So you see gag orders sometimes during a trial. And the reason for that is, the reason that's okay is because you want to protect the jury, for the jury to not be, influenced by, sort of trying to use the media in this way. And so sometimes you will see judges who can get away with doing a gag order during the trial. Never, ever, ever have I ever seen an attempt to tell someone they can't engage in free speech after their case is already, gone through trial. So this is just unheard of. And so the answer of my opponent during the interview and the debate was, well, I just can't believe this happened. I can't believe, number one, he's that uninformed. I mean, this is his issue. But it was convenient for him to not know what was in the order and what it said.
Yeah. Well, and again, back to the key point, one of the reasons we're talking about it is if they don't turn over that $135,000 by Monday, the Department of Revenue will then place a lien on their property. First of all,
their house. This is their house.
Yeah,
that's the
house.
only property they own.
So, Penna, talk about that. Of course, you've had a chance to hear Aaron and Melissa Klein as well, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're brave people because they're just continuing to fight. In fact, they put on their Facebook page that they're not going to give up, and that was one of the things that prompted this gag order. And it's really, for one thing, it's not in the courts. We have to remember that. It's under this regulatory commission. And these commissions can do so much damage to people's lives. We've had these quote-unquote non-discrimination laws passed all over the country in citizens by city councils and different, local bodies and things. So there is a mechanism in place to violate people's rights in the way that the Klein's rights have been violated. They are not an unusual case. They have just been sort of pioneers in this. And so, this is something that has to be addressed in the country. That's the first thing that I need to say. The second thing is that, you said at the beginning that this didn't take very long. Well, your opponent, Kelly, on Fox News Sunday was Evan Wolfson from Freedom to Marry. And now Freedom to Marry is like disbanded. They're no longer called Freedom to Marry anymore because they got that. They won that battle, but they're not going away. All their people, their talent, and their strategy is moving on to another group called Freedom for All, and they're going to start implementing the attacks on religious liberty. They want to go through workplace. That's where they're going, and that's why he was on. So folks need to realize that, this is an interesting story about the Kleins. It's really, really sad what's being done to them. And if it's not, this is not done, it's being appealed, and it needs to be. And these things need to be fought everywhere. Because if, Kelly and I talked a while back right after the ruling, if they're not if some of them slip through, they'll become precedents. And the left will use them to gain rights for everyone. And so these things need to be opposed and won. And I'm so grateful for the Kleins' courage in standing up against this.
Kelly, let me come back. There was one question that if Shannon Bream had a little more time, I would hope she would have asked, but I'm going to ask it. And that is, back to what Penna said just a minute ago, Evan Wolfson made a big point about the fact that these are just a few cases. There's, you got A. Baker here in Colorado, you got A. Baker in Oregon. It's not really this big a deal. We've had same-sex marriage legalized for some time, so it's not a really big issue. And the other thing is he accused you of seeking these individuals out. I thought that in most cases, matter of fact, I'm not even sure you've been that involved in the Oregon case. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, people are calling you, right? So it clarifies some of the things that didn't get covered in that conversation.
Well, number one, none of those cases that I mentioned were our cases, and I hadn't talked to any of those people except for the Kleins because they connected with Sergeant Monk, so he was wrong, of course, about that. And the problem is there are a lot of these. There's Jack Phillips out of Denver who was actually under an order from the court to provide to make a cake and participate in a gay wedding. And if he didn't, he would be held in contempt of court, which means he could literally be thrown in jail. That one, there's the Baronelle Stutzman out of Washington, a grandmother who wouldn't do a flower arrangement. She would sell them flowers, but she couldn't do the arrangement and be part of the wedding. And she's now, not only did they rule that, her business will be up, but that they could actually go after her home. So let's go after a 72-year-old grandmother's home. That's how extreme this is. And then before, a lot of people forget about the Elaine photography case, where you had somebody who was asked to do the photography for a lesbian commitment ceremony, and she said she couldn't, but she referred them. And, that decision ended up with a state Supreme Court ruling that giving up your religious freedom is, quote, the price of citizenship. So, these are happening, and those are just like the ones with bakers and florists. Let's not even get into all the cases we have right now with people who have lost their jobs, but not because of anything they've said at work, but because employers have found out that they believe that marriage is a man and a woman. And in one of those cases, for example, Eric Walsh, our case there, the only way they found out was, and these were government officials, were by reviewing the sermons at his church to find out that he believed marriage is a man and a woman. So I think people don't understand. A lot of people, when they saw the gay marriage decision, they thought, oh, well, it's not going to affect me. Well, if you work, it will, because this stuff is going to make it into your ethics codes of your profession, into the code of conduct, and if you have a different belief, this is going to come at you, and it might cost you your career.
Well, again, I sent out a take action email. It goes on to 2 pages, but it gives you some suggestions, obviously, to pray, to contact your representative, to speak up. And we've only talked about part of that, because what about public officials, especially a judge in Toledo, Ohio? We'll talk about that. And we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Point of View's fiscal year ended last week, and the mailroom, well, they're still tallying up the final gifts to come in, even today, even within the last hour. So we still don't know an exact total, but what we do know, it looks like we met the full match. You stepped up, you gave, and other friends doubled your gift, and for all of that, we continue to be most grateful. Thank you. Point of View is your voice for truth, and your gifts help us continue keeping you informed and equipped for the challenges and opportunities of our time. Thank you one more time for partnering with us. And if you missed out, I assure you your support remains needed in this year. You can still give at pointofview.net. By mail, Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221, or by phone 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. And pointofview.net. Thank you.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View.
From that.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And we are today spending some time focusing on this issue of religious liberty. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And in my action item that went out today, we talked about this judge, Alan McConnell. He said, I declined to marry a non-traditional couple during my duties assignment. The declination was based upon my personal and Christian beliefs established over many years. I apologize to the couple for the delay they experienced and wish them the best. Of course, there have been people calling for his impeachment. Or let's use another example. If you go to libertyinstitute.org/Lang, you have the story there of Katie Lang, a county clerk in Hood County, who, because of her Christian beliefs, did not want to issue a license. And that, again, is a big question. So, Kelly, since that is a case that you are more familiar with, let's talk about this issue. What about a judge? What about a county clerk? That's very different than when you have a business. You are now emboldened by the state to actually provide these kinds of services.
Right. Yes. It's fascinating. I can't think of, I've been doing, this kind of work for 26 years. I really can't think of anything that I've watched the media so mess up and almost intentionally communicate things. I think they really don't know, but I think they don't know because they don't want to know. And they want the controversy. They want the they're defying the law. And the reality is there's more than one law. There's law that of what the state says, what the state law says. And in some states, for instance, it says, in fact, in many states, I'm going to guess it's most, it would say, for instance, if you're a justice of the peace or a judge, you may do a ceremony or do a marriage license situation. You don't have to. It's not a requirement. Now, if you're in the clerk's office and you're the whatever the division is that does marriages, then, those typically will say shall, because if somebody really is duly married, then you issue the certificate. And so the Katie Lang thing is a great example. She's a county clerk, and it says under the law that her office shall issue the marriage license. It doesn't mean that Katie Lang herself has to do it. She has a right under federal and state law to live out her religious freedom, her faith. And the way the law works, it's not real complicated, but if you've got 20 people in a clerk's office and there's one person who has a religious objection, and you can work around that and let everybody else do those, then the law says you have to do that. That's called religious accommodation. It's in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And again, I think people understand that, but boy, that's not the way they want to present these things. They want to make it, pretend that the license is not going to be issued at all. Which is false, and that the person is defying the law. No, they're actually following the law. They have, you don't give up your religious freedoms when you're elected to office. Now, the duties that are required by that office need to be carried out, but the idea that, there's a right to force that person to violate their, beliefs to get that is false. And so you've seen a lot of misinformation, I think, in what we've watched.
You can read about this at libertyinstitute.org, and we may have posted the Katie Lang story at pointofview.net too. The story is interesting to me as you look at this. It shows how, I'm not sure whether these people are activists or they're just very excited about this, but they walked in late last Thursday afternoon, not yesterday, but July 2nd, just before the office was about to close in Hood County, and they were same-sex couple. They wanted a marriage license. Well, this had been less than a week after the decision, and they didn't have all the forms correct with the right genders and all of that. And so not only did there were other people that could do this, but Katie Lang herself called the state to try to find out, can we use this form and just alter it? Am I correct, Kelly?
No, that's right. And it's actually a criminal offense to alter a state form. So that's why she asked. And so, they couldn't issue a form immediately that moment until they got the answer to that. And
they had to wait. So
they had to wait till the next morning coming in the next morning, it was waiting for them. So I don't know how many minutes it is they waited, but anyway, so what did they do? They filed a federal lawsuit because, they didn't get what they wanted at the exact moment that they wanted it. And just incredible.
It shows the quote unquote exuberance.
Yeah,
on the other side.
And again, the all the attacks. I'll tell you, Katie, she was attacked from false reports from her local newspaper and other newspapers that seemed to want to get the story wrong over and over and over again. She was, castigated, shamed, you name it all. But you know what she did? She stood her ground. She said, I'm not going to do this. This violates my faith. I have a right not to do this. And nothing happened. Look, nothing's happened to her, okay? They filed their lawsuit against the county, not against her, because no one would have been able to file a lawsuit against her individually because she has every right not to participate in something that violates her faith if others are available to carry that duty out.
One of the questions I think is going to surface, and I use this column by Mark Davis, and he's a columnist and also a talk show host, and he said that county courthouse workers are not bakers or photographers. While private sector businesses absolutely deserve defense against compulsory participation in weddings they religiously oppose, government workers can stake no such claim. He says the very definition of taxpayer-funded employment is that workers subjugate personal matters to faithfully carry out the law, even if they don't like it. And so he's basically going on to say, well, even if you don't like divorce, you have to fill out the forms for divorce. Even if you're Hindu, Muslim, and you're a restaurant inspector, you still have to go to places that serve meat. What about that? Because that's one of the questions that is being raised in some of these columns now.
Yeah, it's what I'm talking about. He's conflating two things. He's conflating the idea that you have a right to get that service, that government service. That's true. But with the fact that that person has to be the one. Now, and I think most people have heard about these cases in employment in like a pharmacy situation. Somebody comes in and they want, they want
Plan B.
Yeah, they want birth control or abortifacients or something that particular person in their conscience can't give out. Well, if there are two pharmacists there, then there's no problem. And if you actually fired the pharmacist because they weren't the ones giving the pills, then you could be sued under Title VII for a failure to reasonably accommodate the religious beliefs of your employees. If there's just one, then you've got a problem because there is no way to accommodate without providing, what is being asked for. So there's where a person of faith, if they're going to follow their faith and those are their faith objections, they're going to be out of a job and there's not going to be anything you can do about that. But again, in most of these government situations, there are plenty of government employees. There's plenty of other people that are there. So this idea that we as a country don't want to force people to violate their conscience and their faith if another route is available is something I think most everybody in the country really believes in.
Let me take a real practical question from one of our callers, Nancy in South Carolina, WLPG. I'd love to have you share your story and your daughter's story because it's a very good question that I hope Kelly can answer.
Thank you so much. Yes, my daughter is a photographer, and she's actually over in Germany right now finishing up some schooling. I am a cake owner, a bakery, and I am eager to know what we can do today to protect our religious liberty in this area. I've seen a lot of emails about what churches can do, but I'm wondering what steps we need to take today as far as policies and procedures or what we could do.
Oh, that's a great question. There's a lot of things. I would say, number one, Liberty Institute, we put up on the website for churches, Christian nonprofits, and Christian businesses, a website where they could go to those, if whatever they are, church, they click on that button, whatever, and they go, and it's under, if you go to our website, libertyinstitute.org, it says, Are You Protected? Has a picture of a church. And what it does is it lays out if whatever you are, whether you're a church, whether you're a nonprofit, or whether you're a for-profit, a business, a Christian business, it lays out here are the legal documents that you have that you need to look at. And then it has templates of the types of things that you can have in your documents so that you're better protected if you ever are challenged or attacked. If you'll remember, Hobby Lobby had a case, and they won that case. But a major reason they won that case is because they had all that in their documents. They had in their documents why it was important to them as a company to have their position on life. And so when they were being asked to provide something that would actually violate that principle, they actually had a defense and a place to stand. So that's number one, I would say.
Stay on. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back from our break.
There aren't many times in life when a person hopes, really hopes, and prays fervently that they are wrong about something. Now is one of those times for me. I had hoped that if same-sex marriage were ever forced on the nation, as it now has been, the left would be content with the victory and find a way to coexist with people who don't agree. That advocates for gay rights would exhibit the same tolerance that they are asking for. But I didn't think that would happen, because there have been lots of clues along the way suggesting that attaining same-sex marriage was never the left's endgame. And since the Supreme Court's decision in Obergefell versus Hodges was announced, the onslaught of demand for more change has been stunning. The organization Freedom to Marry is closing up shop. It's being reincarnated into a new group, Freedom for All. This group will use the same strategic playbook and many of the same players to try to get state and federal non-discrimination laws on the books. These laws force Christians to act against their beliefs when operating their businesses. The Human Rights Campaign is joining this effort and also working to force all county clerks to register gay marriages, even where the task could easily be transferred to clerks who don't have faith-based objections. There have been calls for the legalization of polygamy. Time magazine came out with a piece recommending the tax-exempt status for churches and most nonprofits be abandoned. The left is now pulling out all the stops to force acceptance of same-sex marriage into the institutions central to the most committed and devoted people of faith. One of the saddest examples of this is demonstrated in a petition from MoveOn.org's so-called gay Christian activist arm, Faithful America. The petition is directed toward a Kansas City rescue mission. It's titled, "Tell City Union Mission, Stop Rejecting Homeless LGBT People." The caption line is, "There's nothing Christian about denying beds to homeless same-sex couples. Other Christian organizations serving the homeless accept families of all stripes. We call on you to end your discriminatory policy." The petition continues. Jesus' words about welcoming the stranger didn't include any asterisks excluding LGBT people. City Union Mission serves LGBT people and takes them in if they're homeless, but the mission draws the line at allowing same-sex cohabitation at their facility. And they require transgender people to dress according to their God-given sex. But this Soros-funded group now demands this change. In the marriage decision, all 9 justices affirmed that religious liberty should be protected. Even the majority opinion, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, stresses that religions may teach and advocate their doctrinal opposition to same-sex marriage. This is a slender reed to hang on to. America was supposed to be about the ability to express and to live out one's faith. The battle now is to hold on to that. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, weekend edition here on Point of View. Any other comments for Nancy before we move on to some of the other phone calls?
Yeah, no, I mean, number one is because she said, "What can we do right now?" It's look at that page we have available, which provides people of faith who have these issues and have these beliefs. They can provide them in their documents, which at least puts them in a better position, the best position possible to try to defend themselves. And they can call if Nancy has any questions, or her daughter when she gets back. I mean, they can call Liberty Institute anytime. We're happy to walk them through, what their rights are. The second thing, though, I would say, and this is like for everybody in South Carolina, for everybody in every state, is what you can do about this is, Penna talked about this earlier. Do you have any of these laws in place that can be used this way? And I bet very, very few people even know. And most of these laws aren't statewide laws. I mean, if the LGBT community has its way, they will make this a federal national law. They will make it state law. They will cover everything, and they will do this type of thing all across the board. But right now, they say that's why they need to do that. That's not the case. There is no law. Like, these are typically city laws, something that they came and pushed through on the city council where people weren't paying attention or where people were very naive. And of course, I think most people have heard about when they did that in Houston, because it resulted in such an upheaval that they ended up, subpoenaing the sermons of pastors and all that. It's happened in a number of cities. But, one of the ways you can avoid this is not having these type of laws show up in your community, because then you don't have to deal with that. If you're in Oregon, you've got a problem. But most states, that's not the law. That's not the state law, and that's not the city law in most places. And in fact, some places where they've done this, I think it was Fayetteville was the last one. When the people found out, they went in and got it thrown out. They went in and said, we want you to repeal this law. So it's something where people can keep this type of discrimination from happening against people of faith if they make sure they don't have these kinds of weapons that can be used to attack people.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Louisiana this time. Roberta, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to speak to the case about the Oregon bakers. One thing that I've learned about the case is that the reason the bakers were fined such a steep fine wasn't that they wouldn't, help the couple. It was that they continued to talk about the situation in the media, and so placed that couple in a really tenuous position that they stayed in the public eye and got death threats. They got harassed by a lot of people, and they were at risk of losing their foster children.
The gay couple couple that wanted the cake?
That's right. And so that the reason that it bothers me that people are really up in arms and feel that the bakery is being victimized, when really, if they had not shared that couple's home address on their Facebook page, and prompted people to start harassing them, it wouldn't have caused that couple to have so many problems. I think they really brought that onto themselves. And moreover, though, I think because you guys haven't mentioned that other side of the situation, as far as I know, I'm traveling through the area. I only caught part of your show. But it makes me concerned that some of these other cases that you're talking about, maybe you're not giving us an accurate picture of what's really happening out there. And, it all comes down to justice and fairness in the public office. These public servants are servants, and if they don't want to do these things, then I believe you're right, they should have the option not to. But in some very small towns, there's only one justice of the peace, there's only one county clerk, and if you're a public servant, then that's something that you have to give up. In private business, that's a different story, but there are these nuances that if we ignore them and just look at things in terms of black and white, we're missing the bigger picture on what makes America a great place to live, that we can live together harmoniously if we remember that we're based on justice and fairness.
It's interesting, the Kleins, the first point she made, the Kleins were harassed and actually driven out of business. Their business was actually harassed, vandalized,
Yep.
And they were driven out of business. They couldn't have their bakery. They had to close up the shop. They began to bake at home. And so, they were the ones that were persecuted. The same-sex couple, I had never heard anything about their address being posted on anybody's Facebook page. I'm not even sure if that's true. I think they've claimed all sorts of harm against themselves. When I mentioned the weight gain and just sleeplessness and all of this, when all they had to do was walk down the street and get another bakery to bake their cake.
Yeah, if you look at, I mean, obviously, Roberta says, she wonders because we didn't mention one fact. I mean, it's 100 and something page opinion. I mean, I would encourage people, go read it. I read it. You'll find that they weren't fined $135,000 because of the Facebook posting. That's one of like 500 facts. You'll find that there was an immediate response before any posting of anything. There was an immediate response in what this commissioner says, because the woman felt so offended and hurt that they wouldn't do the cake, that she went back, that she wouldn't talk to anybody. I mean, they go through this long ordeal of how she reacted and how they reacted to each other and how painful it was and all that before any sort of posting. There was an issue where they had posted something where they essentially said, we're not going to back down. And the clients, evidently you could see somewhere there either the name or the address, and the client said that, they had no idea. They were pointing out that they weren't going to back down. I think it might have even been what they put up in their store.
Yeah, the window of the store.
In the window of the store. But that wasn't the basis for the $135,000 fine. Was the mental anguish, was the rejection of being discriminated against, et cetera. And there's all kinds of facts about that. And again, I would say that it wouldn't matter to me anyway, because in this country, you can engage in free speech. You can live out your faith. Somebody can say something that I think is just, really horrible. You know what? But it doesn't give me a right to have the government come in and destroy their lives because I disagree with what they said or because it hurts my feelings. Hurts my feelings it can't live consistently with free speech. When you live in a free society, when you live in a place where there's freedom of religion, you can't have freedom from religion. When you live in a place where there's free speech, you can't have freedom from speech. Those are alternative universes. So when you have the government come in and have the ability to punish one citizen because they express something that hurt the other citizen by them following their faith, the government's taking sides. I mean, it's not a freedom issue anymore. It's an issue of the government jumping behind and saying, this is what we will decree. And what Roberta said about the clerks is exactly what we said, which is, if there are other people that can do that, then that's what the law requires, and that's what should happen. If there are not, then that's a different issue. And if there's no way to accommodate, then those people obviously are going to be out of a job, and somebody else is going to have to replace them.
I think it sort of implies that in these small rural towns, Christians might not go into public service because they might have to do something that they felt would violate their convictions. And I wonder if we're going to have fewer Christians going into photography, the florist shops, and bakeries in light of all of this as well.
We're going to win those cases eventually.
We're going to take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Point of View's fiscal year ended last week, and the mailroom, well, they're still tallying up the final gifts to come in, even today, even within the last hour. So we still don't know an exact total, but what we do know, it looks like we met the full match. You stepped up, you gave, and other friends doubled your gift. And for all of that, we continue to be most grateful. Thank you. Point of View is your voice for truth, and your gifts help us continue keeping you informed and equipped for the challenges and opportunities of our time. Thank you one more time for partnering with us. And if you missed out, I assure you, your support remains needed in this year. You can still give at pointofview.net. By mail, Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or by phone, 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. And pointofview.net. Thank you.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, it is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and we will spend a little bit of time later on talking about Donald Trump. He actually leads the GOP presidential field right now. Scott Walker, a number of other issues that we want to cover. But let's deal with some issues. First of all, whenever we announce things, people run off and try to find them. If you're looking for the video of the debate between Kelly Shackelford and Evan Wolfson, we put that on the Point of View Facebook page. That was the best place so that you can watch it. It's a little harder to find simply because it's Fox News. You can go to Fox News Sunday and find it, but it's on the Point of View Facebook page. Just a few minutes ago, of course, we had Nancy call in, and then we looked at the website and tried to figure out where to send her. So let's help her and anybody else that's looking for advice if they have a Christian-owned business.
Yeah, it's you go to libertyinstitute.org, and then look down on the right, you'll see Are You Protected? I'll have a picture of a church. You click on that, and it'll have three choices on the bottom, and it'll be churches, nonprofits, or schools. And I was remembering incorrectly. So where you would go if you're a Christian for-profit is just go to the nonprofit one. It's going to be very similar. There might be one little difference, but you'll be able to figure that out. But so go, if you're a Christian business or a Christian ministry that's not a church, that's where you would go to look at the type of templates that you would see in Hobby Lobby or a ministry, Chuck Swindoll's ministry, for instance, or others that have those positions in doctrinal statement, essentially, of what they stand for in those documents.
So again, hopefully you'll find everything, and if not, ask us offline. Penna?
I just want to tell a story. About a month ago, my husband and I were at a wedding, and we sat with some people who actually have a wedding chapel in the area. And I just got an email yesterday about how the outcome of this, but we were talking about, the upcoming decision and all of that. And so my husband said, you just need to protect yourselves. You're a wedding chapel, and they're strong Christian people. And so we gave them Liberty Institute. We referred them to Liberty Institute. And so I just found out that they actually got a lot of help in setting everything up for their to protect themselves. So that was just one of the stories. And it's really not that difficult, but you have to do it.
One of the fun things is when I get every once in a while, and I have over the past months, because we've had this out for a number of months to try to help churches was really where we started. But to get these string emails with all these pastors who are talking about what they've done and how they've changed their documents and how it's not only been a great thing for them and saved them a lot of money from having to go and pay a lot of money to attorneys to do this. I mean, they got help, a little help, but they had all this in place. But how they talked about how, this really has helped us because it's forced us to look at the core beliefs that we have.
Right.
What exactly those are, what the scriptural basis is for that. And it's made us realize, we haven't always been really faithful with making sure we follow through on this, because one of the things we tell people is if you have a policy and you don't follow it, it's not any good. So, for instance, if you have a policy as a church against sex outside of marriage, then it can't be that you allow, adultery and all kinds of sex outside of marriage, but then you only crack down on, same sex. So it just caused a lot of them to go, all right, let's look at where we stand on these different issues, these big issues. Let's nail down the scripture, and then let's be faithful with this as well. And they said that it's been really helpful. So I thought that was really neat to hear.
Well, let's take some phone calls. Matter of fact, some of them relate to some of the conversation we're having here, and then we will get into some of the presidential candidates, because that's certainly another very relevant issue. But let's go to New Hampshire this time, WSEW. Bob, thank you for calling today.
Yeah. I think this claim that mental anguish, lesbian couple undergoing mental anguish says they couldn't get a wedding cake at that bakery, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, there's probably something else in their life, something like that. But I don't deny that they undergo mental anguish. I question whether it's because they couldn't get a wedding cake. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Well, it's just part of the case that they've made. Really.
Yes. Well, and actually what it said is, which is really fascinating, it said, and I think the one with the most, distress, the one who immediately reacted and evidently cried, if you believe what they said, cried 24 hours straight. What they say is, she says something like, I knew, God is judging me, or it was like she was expressing that she had been taught earlier, or she had come from a church background or something where she, something similar to what came from the Kleins. And so what really, might have caused her some issues is she was reminded of that by the Kleins. So in a way, when the caller says, I don't really think it's because of the cake, I think that's exactly right. I think that, she was reminded of something that she used to believe that she had kind of moved past or tried to move past, and it was brought back up.
You've seen some of these cases. Do you think some of these individuals are targeted, or are these just accidental?
Well, I think certainly in that case, I don't know as much as the attorneys handling the case, but I have a feeling that one wasn't targeted. They had done cakes for these people before.
Right, that's the thing. They had a relationship with them.
and
the one in Richland, Washington with Barronell Stutzman, same
that's
thing.
Exactly
They've
right.
done flowers for the group.
Right.
And they were going to do this one until they found it was going to be a part of a wedding. That's what kind of caught them off guard. And then they said, "Oh, we can't do that." So now, in other places, there's no doubt in my mind.
The Elaine Huguenin one, because where they had one lesbian partner call in and pretend it was for a heterosexual wedding or commitment ceremony, and then the other lesbian partner call. So that was obviously one that was targeted.
I think Masterpiece Bakeries was targeted.
And I think that one was targeted.
And we've got...
So some were, some weren't.
We've had churches around the country who are calling us and saying they're getting calls from two men or two women, and they know what these churches are and what they stand for and what their doctrine is, and they're clearly being set up for something. So I do think that... I think you almost have to look really hard to find a baker or a florist who doesn't want the money. So it really is the opposite of the situation you had back with the civil rights movement, where literally people of color, couldn't have a place to stay on the road. There was no hotel there was no place they were allowed to eat. That's a very different situation from having to look out and really find someone who has a different belief and therefore won't, participate in a wedding ceremony.
I've seen certain columnists say, hey, listen, it's just baking a cake. Go ahead and do it. You should do it. But I've also heard Melissa Klein speak and seen what she's written about how she thinks about a person when they come for their wedding cake and what she does, how she gets to know the whole love story about these people. And she tries to come up with ideas to incorporate their story into the cake. Well, so you can understand why if she's a God-fearing Christian woman and she's doing that, that's part of her service, that a same-sex wedding just wouldn't fly. I mean, she just couldn't possibly do it because she can't. Her creativity is all wound up in her faith. So, let her explain that in a column. And I think these columnists that are saying, no, it's just baking a cake, will see differently. Maybe not.
Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls, and then we'll get into some of the presidential candidates, because as we are talking about all these issues, there are some consequences, and we've learned a little bit more just in the last couple of weeks where some individuals stand on everything from immigration to religious liberty. We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a suggestion. Read Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and then compare it to the government we have today. The framers set forth what is the legitimate role of the federal government. You will find that it does give the government power to collect taxes and duties. It is required to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. It can coin money, establish post offices and roads. That's about it. Professor Walter Williams, in his new book, American Contempt for Liberty, reminds us that nowhere in the Constitution do we find authority for Congress to tax and spend up to 3/4 of what Congress taxes and spends for today. In other words, there's no constitutional authority for farm subsidies, bank bailouts, food stamps, Social Security, Medicare, and thousands of other federal spending programs. The point he is trying to make is the current government is a significant departure from the original principles of limited government and individual freedom, and we are paying heavily for this expanded government. He estimates that at the turn of the century, expenditures for all levels of government were about $1.7 billion. The average taxpayer paid only $60 a year in taxes. Today, federal expenditures alone are nearly $4 trillion, and the average taxpayer pays more than $10,000 a year for federal, state, and local taxes. You can look at it another way. From the beginning of this country until 1920, federal expenditures were only 3% of GNP. Today, federal expenditures are nearly 25% of GDP. As bad as this trend is, we need to remind ourselves that government is spending more than it receives in taxes. Each day, America is going deeper in debt. We have exceeded $18 trillion in debt and show no signs of balancing a budget anytime in the future. It's worth remembering these facts when evaluating candidates for federal office. I'm not interested in a politician that wants to keep driving down this road. It's time to stop and turn around. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. Let's go out to Texas, KBJS. Mike, thank you for calling today.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call, Kerby and Kelly. I just want to say my son and my daughter-in-law are both doctors now. They just finished their residency work, and they are about to probably go to a small town soon. And just a thought came to me that I believe the effects of this decision by the Supreme Court will be far-reaching and go into every probably aspect of our lives and culture. And I just think we need to be sober. There's obviously some things that we can do and are doing, but the bottom line, I believe, is that unless we walk with God every day and trust Him in prayer and read His Word, eventually we will fail. We'll either capitulate or we'll just simply throw up our hands. And so that's all I had to say. Thanks again for taking my call.
I think those going into medicine are certainly going to be affected by the Affordable Care Act very dramatically. It's a little harder to see how they will be affected by this decision about same-sex marriage, but who knows?
I know how.
Okay, go for it.
Go.
I mean, and this is, again, one of those things that I think people aren't thinking about. And I could go through a list of...
Like licensing and things like that?
Yeah,
okay.
I think if you're a professional, every profession, I mean, I don't care whether you spent your whole life to be a doctor, a psychiatrist or psychologist or a lawyer or, studied to be a real estate agent, you name the profession, they have non-discrimination rules.
True.
And if you won't sign on to those non-discrimination rules, then you can't be in the profession. Well, does anybody really question whether they're bringing this they're going to try to bring this non-discrimination rule into all of these professions? I mean, there's no doubt. And if they're successful, you'll have a situation, like Paul Diamond described from the barrister from the UK, where you kind of have to choose, do I give up my profession or just be silent about my faith? And, that it's going to affect everybody. There's a way that I think most people can realize that's coming to their world, and they're liable to be in a situation of having to decide where they stand. And as Mike said, whatever the consequences, standing with Christ is the right, place to stand. But I can't say that might not cost you.
And this marriage decision has been compared to the Roe versus Wade decision. And in that decision that took place, there has been a pretty good body of conscience protection that's developed out of it. I don't know if it was in existence right away and if people had to go to battle for it right away. And so that's why it's fairly strong for medical people, pharmacists, and others. But that's not the case right now. I mean, it's kind of like all over the map, and people are trying everything they can try. So there's a sense in which this is much worse for religious liberty than that one.
I might just recommend to some people that would like to read a very well-written piece by Mark Stein, who's been on the program with us before, called The Stupidity of Sophisticates. And part of it is he had been on Bill Bennett's show, and some people had had problems with the idea that, you've got to choose either one or the other. And so they use this example of the 1930s, you have to keep your head down. So he goes through this very long thing. Imagine if, and then he takes you back to the 1930s before Hitler was actually the Führer, and that you had some kind of protection, some conscience protections that may have been provided by the then chancellor. And so as a result, he was around for a while. And of course, President von Hindenburg provides those conscience protections, as does, I think, Justice Anthony Kennedy did, right? But then he's gone, and all of a sudden, then the full weight of the government comes down on your head. And I thought he did a really good job of reminding us, Kelly, that yes, theoretically, the Supreme Court voted 9-0 to actually provide religious freedom. But I'm sorry, I'm one of those people around the table that believes that maybe those are nothing more than paper protections, and that very quickly that could change.
That's what the dissent said. But that's kind of what the dissents are supposed to do. They're supposed to kind of pick at the majority. But I tell you what we're going to do. I mean, because we do litigation, is we're going to
you're going to use that all the time.
We're going to say it's 9-0 because that's what it says.
Yeah.
And I think if we move quickly enough in these cases, we might be able to build a really strong body of law that does say that while we have this decision on marriage, we at the same time had very strong statements that the First Amendment was not overruled, that people have a right to disagree, they have a right to advocate, they have a right to religious freedom, to be against same-sex marriage and for marriage as a man and a woman, and that decision in no way reduced that, protection. I think the bad news is we're going to have to fight a whole lot of these in a whole lot of different areas. Tax-exempt status is going to be under attack, right? Mm-hmm. We know that from the Supreme Court. If you're a faith-based adoption group or foster care, you see what's coming. If you have any interaction with the federal government, if you're a grantee, if you're a Christian college, or maybe you're a student who gets loans from the federal government at a Christian college that believes marriage is a man and a woman, very well could have that being changed. As I said, if you're in a profession, I think you're going to see this kind of stuff. If you listen to somebody on the radio or TV that you really like as a Christian minister or a Christian ministry, do you think that their FCC license is going to be questioned if they won't change their view on marriage? I mean, it's coming. That attack is coming. So, I mean, we could go down a long list.
Yes.
I hope we're going to win all of these, and I do think we've got the tools to work with at this point, but we're going to have to fight for those things in ways we didn't have to before.
Let's go back to the phones in Kentucky, KYGE. Judith, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, hi. I appreciate you taking my call. I would like to say that I'm a very conservative Orthodox Christian, meaning that I believe what the Bible says. And I know that it says that adultery, fornication, and homosexuality and bestiality are all sins. And I was just wondering if this lady at the bakery would bake a cake for a couple that she knew who'd been cohabitating or living together, or what I think the young people now call hooking up. Most, at least the people I run into who claim to be Christians who are getting ready to get married, most of them are very upfront about saying that they're already living together and have finally decided to tie the knot.
So we should be glad they're getting married.
But also we should warn them not to
wondering-
live together, because as we have talked about on this program, it increases your divorce rate by about 50%. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's not my point. My point is, should the owner of the bakery, and since she goes to great lengths to find out about people's romance and their history, if she finds out that they've been living together, then should she also turn them down for having a cake baked? And that's where I'm going to leave this. Let's discuss that. And I'm going to hang up now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the point she's making that Melissa and Aaron Klein are making as they make this decision that's really affected their lives is, this isn't a marriage. My God that I believe in, my faith teaches me what marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
So I am making a cake for something that I just totally disagree with the whole institution, the whole idea of changing the institution of marriage. They're making a huge societal, faith-based statement. You're not going to say, okay, to every person that comes in for service from you, you're not living right. I'm not going to serve you because you're not living according to my faith.
Mm-hmm.
That is not what this is about.
Right.
This is about participating as a believer in something that you know that is totally against God's principles.
And I did see a question similar to that. I saw Aaron and Melissa on, I think, Hannity this week, and they were asked, what about other things? Would you do this? Would you? And what if there were the other sinful things? And the answer that came out of Aaron's mouth was, look, it's real simple. We just don't want to celebrate sin. So I think that the situation that Judith brings up, I bet they would be fine doing a cake. I don't know. You'd have to ask them, because I don't think they're celebrating whatever they've done in their life. I think they're celebrating their wedding, and their wedding being a man and a woman, and something that an institution God created, is something they want to celebrate. So I think my guess is that's how they would separate that.
I think so. I think that's a good separation. I think Penna did a good job of making that. It's not the sin issue. It's you're creating a institution called marriage that isn't marriage.
Right.
And God defined and really defined what marriage was. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll get some more of your phone calls, but also want to spend just a little bit of time, as we always do, getting some insight into some of the candidates. They're asking for your financial support. Pretty soon they're going to have a debate. They're going to be asking for your vote. And I think this is a time to pay attention to some of these candidates. And who's in the lead right now? Would never have guessed. Donald Trump. 15%, 4 or 5 points ahead of the next few, like Jeb Bush and Rand Paul. So we'll talk about him. Scott Walker's in the news, so we'll talk about him. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View's fiscal year ended last week, and the mailroom, well, they're still tallying up the final gifts to come in, even today, even within the last hour. So we still don't know an exact total, but what we do know, it looks like we met the full match. You stepped up, you gave, and other friends doubled your gift, and for all of that, we continue to be most grateful. Thank you. Point of View is your voice for truth, and your gifts help us continue keeping you informed and equipped for the challenges and opportunities of our time. Thank you one more time for partnering with us. And if you missed out, I assure you your support remains needed in this year. You can still give at pointofview.net. By mail, Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221, or by phone 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Thank you.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. It is weekend edition, and oftentimes we spend maybe the first segment talking about religious liberty. We spent the first hour and a half and could keep going, and we'll certainly take some more phone calls on that in just a minute. But I did want to mention a few other things, not the least of which is Donald Trump has sucked all the oxygen out of the atmosphere right now, and because of that, according to the latest Economist YouGov poll, he is leading 15% of respondents, 4 points ahead of then Governor Jeb Bush and Senator Rand Paul, who were tied for second place, much further ahead of Scott Walker, Marco Rubio, Mike Huckabee, and then the list goes down from there. Now, a lot of that is name identification, but I have said before, see if you around the round table agree or disagree, only in a year where there's such distrust of politicians would a candidacy by, say, a Ben Carson on one side or a Donald Trump on the other even be significant, because most of the time Americans say, well, we really want somebody who's going to be in that Oval Office who has been a governor because he or she has shown executive experience, or maybe a senator, but individuals that have never been in political office. And we see some of them still gaining quite a bit of visibility right now. Any comments, Kelly?
I just have a hard time even understanding, even with all those motivations, how they could jump behind Donald Trump. I mean, he's obviously he's almost a fake character. He's almost a caricature of himself. He's so full of himself that it's just it's kind of an entertainment value, I think, for many people. It's shocking.
And he did put immigration on the table. We talked about it just 2 days ago. I mean, all sorts of things. I mean, we're talking about immigration right now for three reasons. Number one, Ann Coulter's book, Adios America. Number two, Donald Trump's statements about that. Then number three, of course, the killing of Kate Steinle there in San Francisco, and all the issues we've talked about in terms of sanctuary cities. But nevertheless, that's the case. So obviously, everybody's been talking about Donald Trump this week, but let's go down to that second tier. What about Jeb Bush and Scott Walker and some others? You've been investigating some of this, Kelly, and I love to get some of your inside perspective.
Well, the Scott Walker news over the past week or so, I think that's really big, that I don't know how much it was talked about around the country, but certainly the articles, the two different articles that came out about his wife and children and the reaction to the same-sex marriage decision, I think really shocked a lot of people. And that being that, Scott Walker has said he's for marriage being a man and a woman. And so when the decision came out, he came out with a statement, which, by the way, anybody in the Republican primary, it's a smart move, et cetera. Well, there was this long article about how his children were upset with him and his wife disagreed with him and that she had to talk to him. And you learned that, his wife was essentially a Democrat and all this stuff. And you just immediately saw all these, postings and analyses from people who felt like they were burned in the past by, well, Bush is pro-life, but it turns out his wife wasn't. And, they started going through all these people and how they were, if I'd only known that. And so I really think that the Walker campaign doesn't understand, because they gave these interviews fairly freely.
Yes.
And I think maybe they thought they could kind of spread the gap and everybody'd like them. The conservatives would say, well, Walker's my man. And then the folks who weren't as conservative would say, well, I like his family. And maybe that's what they thought. But I think I have a feeling the social conservative air just went out of his balloon. I don't think very many people are going to feel like they can trust him on those issues now. They've seen this before with other wives of people, and they didn't turn out to be real strong on those issues. And so I think that was a huge deal. I think those people are all now looking at different camps, and they don't feel like that's the place to go if it's the life or marriage or those issues.
Scott Walker's been an interesting candidate to me. He's not even a candidate yet. He hasn't even announced, number one.
That's true.
One of the few. And I watched it from, several months ago, back at the end of 2014, social conservatives were interested in him, and they were looking at him, and I heard lots of positive comments about him. And, certainly he had some great conservative economic accomplishments in Wisconsin, and he's always said he's pro-life. There's nothing to say he's not. But also, it's been interesting, too, because he's a pastor's son. People have just assumed that he was going to be very strong on the institution of marriage. A lot of the people, that I know that are social conservatives just it was kind of like, why would you think that? Just because you're assuming because his father's what kind of a pastor, So that was a dumb assumption to make, number one, about Scott Walker. But the other part of it is I think, we have to start amassing information about these people. I mean, people get into these races. I remember Herman Cain coming in and just racing. He just catapulted to the top, and then they found out a moral issue with him, so he was gone. So, these candidates bear looking into. They bear questioning and answering on all the issues that are important to us. There's a huge segment of the Republican Party whose social conservative issues are important to. And when a candidate is considered to be strong and viable and hasn't even had to answer those questions at all, I think it's concerning. And then, of course, we came out this week with the story Kelly mentioned, where his family isn't even with him on an issue that's become very important and even more important as a result of the Supreme Court decision.
If we think marriage is an issue, and we see some of the candidates this last week saying, well, it's settled law or it's a settled issue, should that be an issue? Because didn't we see Marco Rubio and Carly Fiorina and some others say that? Penna, what's your thoughts about that?
We did, and we tried to prepare people that listen to Point of View before the decision that, you can't just accept that court opinion and just say, okay, all of a sudden God's law is overruled because of the Supreme Court. There's various ways that we can still support marriage. One of the ways is the way Ted Cruz has talked about, and that is you actually get Congress to pass something that takes courts out of the jurisdiction over marriage. We've talked about that since the 90s, but it's become important again. Judicial retention and talking about elections and how important those are. There's just lots of different things in states, pastor protection acts and other protections. So rather than just making that blanket statement, it's settled law, which is almost like disarming. I'm not going to fight for marriage anymore. I'm not ready to do that, and anybody that I vote for will not be ready to do that.
Let's take another phone call, and we'll go to Kentucky KYGE. Brenda, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
I was wondering if you had heard that the homosexuals are going to sue Nelson Publishing and Zondervan Publishing for having it in the Bible about the homosexuals being a sin. And I wonder where the ACLU gets their money. Yeah. I wonder where they get their money for all these ACLU suits.
Well, two questions. First of all, we have heard about that. I don't think the suit's going anywhere, Kelly, but the bigger issue, let's talk about that because, where does the ACLU get its funds? Where does the Americans United for Separation Church and State get their funds? And then where does Alliance Defending Freedom or Liberty Institute get your funds? Because I think it's important for people to learn that.
Well, the nonprofit groups like you're describing, we all get our funds from donations from people. And so the ACLU, it's like about $150 million.
Yes.
It includes at times, $20 million checks from George Soros, for instance.
Yes. See? I think we should talk about that.
Yeah, so they come from, donations from folks. And, her call about suing because the Bible, discriminates on the basis of sexual orientation. Their problem is they're suing the wrong people. They really need to sue God. But the thing I thought about that is
or Moses.
Yeah, they don't have
Paul.
personal, as a legal standpoint, they would have a hard time getting personal jurisdiction, and I don't think they would want it if they were successful.
I don't think so either.
Such a good line. Let's take another phone call real quickly in Georgia on the Good News Network. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hi, thank you. What I was going to say, Penna, I wanted to say thank you for bringing up the fact that marriage is between a man and a woman. So what two males do or what two females do in the legal realm, they can call it marriage, but it's not marriage. And as far as I'm concerned, is this battle over, far from being over. So I just hope that people will be encouraged that there are still things we can do, and I just don't call it marriage. They can call it whatever they want, but they're changing the definition of the word, which was instituted, of course, by God. Thank you.
Sometimes our terminology is really important. I appreciate that, Mary. And I'd say keep it up.
Yeah, and I do think what she's referencing is important. You know, when you have, I saw an article by one of the most active political guys in Iowa about the response to the Supreme Court decision, and I think his conclusion was there's now only, it was either 3 or 4 who are even in the running in Iowa because a number of the others disqualified themselves when they did that. Not saying he didn't think they should get it. He just said he knew they were done because they said, hey, listen to the court, let's move on, and that wasn't going to work there.
We're going to talk more about that, but we have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll do so right after these important messages.
There aren't many times in life when a person hopes, really hopes, and prays fervently that they are wrong about something. Now is one of those times for me. I had hoped that if same-sex marriage were ever forced on the nation, as it now has been, the left would be content with the victory and find a way to coexist with people who don't agree. That advocates for gay rights would exhibit the same tolerance that they are asking for. But I didn't think that would happen, because there have been lots of clues along the way suggesting that attaining same-sex marriage was never the left's endgame. And since the Supreme Court's decision in Obergefell versus Hodges was announced, the onslaught of demand for more change has been stunning. The organization Freedom to Marry is closing up shop. It's being reincarnated into a new group, Freedom for All. This group will use the same strategic playbook and many of the same players to try to get state and federal non-discrimination laws on the books. These laws force Christians to act against their beliefs when operating their businesses. The Human Rights Campaign is joining this effort and also working to force all county clerks to register gay marriages, even where the task could easily be transferred to clerks who don't have faith-based objections. There have been calls for the legalization of polygamy. Time magazine came out with a piece recommending the tax-exempt status for churches and most nonprofits be abandoned. The left is now pulling out all the stops to force acceptance of same-sex marriage into the institutions central to the most committed and devoted people of faith. One of the saddest examples of this is demonstrated in a petition from MoveOn.org's so-called gay Christian activist arm, Faithful America. The petition is directed toward a Kansas City rescue mission. It's titled, Tell City Union Mission, Stop Rejecting Homeless LGBT People. The caption line is, There's nothing Christian about denying beds to homeless same-sex couples. Other Christian organizations serving the homeless accept families of all stripes. We call on you to end your discriminatory policy. The petition continues. Jesus' words about welcoming the stranger didn't include any asterisks excluding LGBT people. City Union Mission serves LGBT people and takes them in if they're homeless, but the mission draws the line at allowing same-sex cohabitation at their facility. And they require transgender people to dress according to their God-given sex. But this Soros-funded group now demands this change. In the marriage decision, all 9 justices affirmed that religious liberty should be protected. Even the majority opinion, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, stresses that religions may teach and advocate their doctrinal opposition to same-sex marriage. This is a slender reed to hang on to. America was supposed to be about the ability to express and to live out one's faith. The battle now is to hold on to that. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we only have a few minutes. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and I thought for just a minute, Kelly, we come back to that issue. You talked about Iowa. Let's face it, the Iowa caucuses are important. Then you have the New Hampshire primary, you have South Carolina, you have Nevada, and a couple of others. But it does seem to me, as you were saying just a minute ago, that right now we have, by next week, we'll have 16 candidates on the Republican side. Some of them are going to have to break out, and some of them are not going to make it past Iowa. And part of that has to do with some of these social issues. True?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's Iowa is a place where the social conservative issues are very important, and you really don't have a chance if you're seen to be an enemy or somebody who's not at least supportive of that. And I think what's interesting is you can almost put all these candidates on a spectrum, where they are at any one time. Jeb Bush is kind of the moderate candidate. And then you have people show up like Scott Walker. And then at first, everybody, I think if you'd ask, well, a lot of people were going, well, I don't think Jeb Bush is conservative enough, so I'm going with Scott Walker. And then they began to find out more about Scott Walker because they liked him on the union stuff. They liked him for standing up, but then they find out his family's where on all these issues, and they start splintering off of there. But you almost go down the line and you get to, you eventually get to people who are really conservative, but they're splitting each other's vote up. The Mike Huckabees, the Ted Cruz, the Rick Santorums, they're all kind of in there together. I mean, a little bit the Ben Carson, although he's a different candidate because he doesn't have the experience, et cetera. But there are a lot of people that support them that are the really strong conservatives across the board type people. And you just wonder if it's almost like whoever has coalesces around one of their people the first is going to really break out of the pack. And you just wonder how that's going to happen, when that's going to happen. I mean, I know they're going to do this poll to decide which 10 are in the first debate.
I would hate to be the one making the decision about which 10 you bring in.
I know. It's all coming up soon. I mean, there'd be a strategy to spending some of your money right now to get your name up in the poll so that you make it into the debate.
Yeah.
So it's really wild. But there is really somewhat of a continuum if you look at the candidates and you see where they're standing and who is getting behind them and where they are in the political spectrum.
I just look back to 2012 and remember that you had people shoot up, and the social conservatives and the evangelicals, they'd say, okay, well, this person, not only do I agree with them, but they can also win, so I'll get behind them. And then they would be shot down in some way. And it happened like 4 times.
Yes, I remember.
And Rick Santorum was the last one, and then finally Mitt Romney ended up being the nominee. And the social conservatives got behind him because he was the best of all, between the Democrat and the Republican. And so, it just can't, if it happens again like that, we'll probably lose to Hillary. And instead, it might even be worse because there are so many, but maybe it'll be better. Maybe many, many, many candidates will drop out before the end of the summer. I sincerely doubt it, though.
I doubt it too.
Crazy.
And you say they would lose to Hillary Clinton. They might lose to Bernie Sanders.
Well, they might.
Yeah. Which brings up something else. This week we saw a good illustration of something Kelly and you have talked about for years, and that is when the winds are blowing a particular direction, and especially in primaries, everybody's a conservative. Well, right now the winds are blowing the other direction. You have had Hillary Clinton actually speak out against sanctuary cities, and yet I read earlier in the week her statement at Dartmouth where she thought it was a good idea. You have the former mayor of San Francisco, the senior senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, speaking out against sanctuary cities, but I don't believe a word of it. So one of the things we need to do is get some of those valuations that I know many of these family policy groups do, because everybody right now will tell you that they're pro-life and they're for marriage and they're for closing the border and they believe that we should really begin to focus on jobs. But there are certain people right now that we know might really believe that, and there are a lot of others that we know are just going to say that but really don't believe it.
No, that's right. And I think the most telling piece of information you can get on a candidate is finding out what they gave to, what they sacrificed for, what they volunteered for before they ever ran for office. That's the only way I've ever really been able to figure out that somebody is going to be faithful to that issue. So, if you've got somebody and they're running and they are pro-life, boy, are they pro-life, but they never gave to any pro-life cause before they ran, they never volunteered, they never did anything, then you know what? I'm like, I'm not believing you. I'm just not going there. They might think they're even pro-life, but when the pressure comes, that there's no scars, there's no anything where they actually have proven that they're not going to back down. So that to me is one of the things as you look at people's history and what they were committed to, and with their free time, what they gave to, what causes they cared about, because I think that tells you a lot about what their real commitments are.
Or if they put their career on the line, like if yes, candidates, people who are in office can vote, right? Like if you've got a senator running or a congressman and you see their votes are pro-life or pro-family, that's great. But if you see that they actually stood up and risked their career by advocating for something, then you can see that that's where their heart is. And I guess finding out where their heart is really important. I mean, look how badly people were burned. I'm sure there were lots of people in the Democrat Party who believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And during the last campaign in 2012, both candidates said the same thing about what marriage was. It wasn't very long, though, before the one that was reelected changed his tune.
Yeah. Well, and we hear that Donald Trump is evolving on his view on gay marriage and has in the past been in favor of abortion rights and has given Democratic candidates, but he's leading in the polls. But realistically, money is another issue, Kelly.
Yes.
Obviously, Donald Trump can self-fund this. Jeb Bush has the money, but I believe that Ted Cruz has the money too. Are we really looking at some of the people that have the financial, and maybe Marco Rubio? So these other candidates may be kidding themselves right now.
I think so.
Isn't that a possibility?
Yeah, especially because of the way it's set up. And most people who don't pay close attention don't realize, but it used to be that you would have the Iowa primary, you'd have the New Hampshire, and then you'd have South Carolina. And I mean, that would basically be it for the month. This time, there's going to be 21 primaries within a month. So if you go into January without like $100 million, you can't possibly have the staff and everything else in place to compete in all these places. So I think that if you're looking at people and they don't have the money now, I mean, obviously Jeb Bush is going to have the money. I mean, he's got all the connections to his brothers plus his own connections. I think that you're clearly, as you said, Donald Trump's got his own money that is going to last him a while. But I think it's really important to look at what their counts say. Look at what is in. I mean, Ted Cruz having $51 million is a big deal. Yeah. So despite the fact that he doesn't show up big in the polls right now, he's got some staying power, and he's going to get his shot at some point. The others, even if they're performing well, you can't do what you could do in the past, sort of catch on, just really get popular in January and just go, because it's too late because you didn't have the money in place, and so you can't get ready for what's occurring.
Well, we've covered a lot of issues today, but if you find yourself saying, I want a little bit more, we've posted a number of articles, and including the link to Liberty Institute. That link there is Are You Protected? And so those of you that were asking the question, as interestingly enough Nancy was, talk about a double hit. I own a bakery and my daughter's doing photography. Okay, you want to go there. If you want to see that point-counterpoint debate that Kelly Shackelford was a part of, go to our Point of View Facebook page, and we have all sorts of links there as well. So just been a great opportunity. Penna and Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have, and I hope you'll have a good weekend. I want to thank Abby and Andrew for their help behind the scenes, as well as Catherine and Chris. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Point of View's fiscal year ended last week, and the mailroom, well, they're still tallying up the final gifts to come in, even today, even within the last hour. So we still don't know an exact total, but what we do know, it looks like we met the full match. You stepped up, you gave, and other friends doubled your gift, and for all of that, we continue to be most grateful. Thank you. Point of View is your voice for truth, and your gifts help us continue keeping you informed and equipped for the challenges and opportunities of our time. Thank you one more time for partnering with us. And if you missed out, I assure you your support remains needed in this year. You can still give at pointofview.net. By mail, Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221, or by phone 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Thank you. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.